So it won't be quite as short as RS's presentation, but this one's pretty brief. And Amy Potter is the co-shepherd on this one. So I don't think I need to go through this. We've been talking about it for the last hour and a bit. That's the background. So we already all know the problem. Unfulfilled requests create an opportunity for ARIN members to claim need for number resources, wait for those resources to become available via returns or reclamations, acquire them, wait a year and a day, and then profit from them. ARIN can avoid this by abolishing the waiting list and transferring returned and reclaimed resources to organizations that have qualified via the existing 8.3 process. So the policy statement essentially says that we would get rid of section 4.1.8 all the way through and add a new policy section on returned and reclaimed resources. It also says that ARIN will auction returned and reclaimed IPv4 number resources to recipients qualified under section 8.3. The revenues from those auctions would be realized from this activity will be allocated for purposes as directed by the Board of Trustees. And the author also left us a comment that the specific auction methods and implementation details used to distribute the return addresses are outside of the purview of the policy process, so that would be something dealt with at a later date and outside of this process. So there's no discussion so far on PPML about this particular policy, and I'll open it up for discussion from there.
I'm sure there'll be no discussion on this one. Maybe there won't be, I don't know. Approach the microphone, and Owen wins.
Owen DeLong, ARIN AC. I strongly oppose this policy proposal. There's no good that comes from this, in my opinion. ARIN does not need the revenues from this. It doesn't have a purpose in mind for those revenues. I'm sure we would find one, but in general, in my experience, a large supply of revenue looking for a purpose in a not-for-profit organization tends to lead away from goodness. Witness the I can make money fast GTLD scheme. I think this is just a bad idea on multiple levels. It also would disadvantage the very members of the community we're intending to serve under 418 strongly. And so I really think that it's a bad idea on both sides of that equation.
Okay, thank you. Over there.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. I don't support this policy. If we want to be altruistic, we can return it to IANA, like we have done with some previous blocks, and let them then distribute it out to regions that need it. But I believe we do have a need for this space, and this is not the way to go about it. I have a fundamental issue with my doctor getting a kickback for services rendered. I have a fundamental problem with ARIN subconsciously or consciously being involved in the auction process of IP space. I don't need a quota system where staff are looking at things going, well, you know, if it was done this way, we'd get revenue. And exactly.
No,
Yes.
Don't encourage the argument.
And perceived or real is irrelevant. It just completely dilutes the stature that ARIN has with the global community in how it operates, and this would be a massive knock to that.
Thank you. Center microphone.
Rob Seastrom speaking for myself because that's all I got. I agree with Kevin that the concerns as far as appearances with the other IRRs, RIRs is a problem, but I also believe that this is far from being the worst possible outcome. If we're looking at this from the standpoint of stopping the incentives for arbitrage or for making misrepresentations to registration services, this does it and stops it cold. We're handing out things that have value for free. We're not running a charity here. We're not for profit, but that doesn't mean that we're picking winners and losers. So I think that picking winners based on an externality that favors making misleading statements to registration services is a couple steps away from goodness. So I'm on the edge, I'm teetering on the edge of supporting this as written. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the far microphone again.
Joe Provo, Aaron AC, Google, speaking for myself. Do not support the intent, as Kevin outlined, pretty much summed that up well. If by some miracle it goes forward, I would think we need to address the language that talks about revenue stuff that's kind of outside of general policy discussion. And I think
Sorry, which part?
the second sentence, I think, talks about at the discretion of the board of directors, which all revenue really is. All the money management is at the discretion of the board of directors, so it's kind of pointless.
It's actually as directed, but yeah, I
Yeah,
understand your point.
yeah. Or if it does move forward, then perhaps that should actually specify an earmark and make it an earmark fund instead of an unspecified thing.
Okay. Thank you for that. Sorry. To the center microphone.
Chris Tassett Law, Aaron AC. So I oppose this policy for two reasons. First of all, I do think we need to be able to find conditions under which we reinstate the waiting list. But I do also want to address the economic issue. I've been thinking a lot about this, and having ARIN essentially sell address space, I think would be an enormous departure of the way that the organization views IP addresses as a whole. In many ways, it runs contrary to its history of trying to treat address space as a public, non-property resource. It would, for the specific commercial transactions involved, raise a whole bunch of questions. If somebody's paying a lot of money for actual space, shouldn't they then have an irrevocable property right to it? Could ARIN really ever expect to be able to take it away again under any conditions? So it raises a whole bunch of very complex problems that I think would need to be thought through by the board of trustees far and above policy issues associated with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, we are depleting our speakers, so if you'd like to speak on this topic, please approach a mic expeditiously. Otherwise, we will close the microphones at the end of our next comment.
Andrew Dole speaking for myself. I will note that there has been a number of people on the PPML who have supported this idea, just not under this specific policy. So there's more, I think, positive posts regarding an auction idea on the list than zero. There have been zero under this specific policy. So, and then to the issue itself, I believe we need to provide a financial disincentive for organizations to game the system. An auction is one method to provide a financial disincentive to do so. I've also, as discussed earlier in the day, we talked about a fee for a waitlist allocation. I also believe that is a financial disincentive to perform activities that would lead to potential fraud activities. So I could support both of those ideas. I don't know the exact best method to do that, but I think just changing the size and some restrictions is probably not enough to make the types of issues go away that have caused the board to suspend the policy.
Okay. Again, we need to close the microphone soon, so please approach a microphone. We'll give you the last one before we close.
John.
Oh, John, what?
Go ahead, John.
Oh,
Okay. Okay. David Farmer, University of Minnesota, Aaron AC. My gut reaction to this proposal is bleep no. However, this is a radical change, and maybe this problem needs some radical change. So while I probably don't support it, we need to talk about this. The only thing that I'd say is before I could even possibly support this, I would need to have a better idea of where the revenue goes. Just creating this pile of money without knowing what's going to be done with it seems like a horrible idea.
Yeah, that would be obviously out of the scope of the policy. It's tough. We don't, normally the board would not weigh in on it, and nor am I suggesting we'll now on a policy and draft, but obviously if this was to, a policy like this was to progress, there would be staff analysis, legal analysis, and we'd probably, I'm sure, have a lot of questions about that too. We're going to close the microphones after this speaker. So this is the last one. Please get in the line if you want to speak.
Chris Woodfield, Salesforce ARIN-AC. When thinking about this problem more, I remembered that in the US, the FCC auctions off bandwidth, radio frequency. This feels very similar to that process in a lot of ways, but that itself is not a great policy in many people's opinion. It really does allow the space to be consolidated in ways that I don't think ARIN wants to see the V4 address space consolidated. So I think there's been some arguments towards similarities to that, but I would caution against making that type of analogy. Speaking to the point Dave mentioned, is that yes, we would definitely want to understand more about where the revenues would go, but that conflicts with the guidance that financial discussions and financial directives are explicitly outside the scope of the NERPM. So I don't have a good answer on how one would resolve that, but if someone has suggestions, I'd like to hear it.
Okay. Microphones are now closed with the last speaker from Mr. John Sweeting.
John Sweeting with ARIN. I just wanted to make a couple of points about the wait list suspension that I'm going to cover in my department presentation tomorrow, but since there's a lot of people here and we're talking about the wait list, I just want everybody to know that, so the wait list suspended a very specific portion of the wait list. So it was the distribution from the wait list. We are currently accepting, processing, approving, placing people onto the wait list in accordance with how we put them on the wait list. The only thing we're not doing is we're not distributing from the wait list. However, we are still doing all the internal procedures that we do to get ready to distribute from the wait list. So once there's a policy in place that allows us to do that, we are ready to do that following that policy. The only other thing I'd like to point out is part of that policy that was suspended was that if you get something off the transfer market, you get removed from the wait list. That's suspended. If you go to the transfer market to get through this period, we are not removing you from the wait list. However, you will have to answer to the space, any space you get, and show that you still qualify for whatever space we're going to issue you.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, John. That's handy. All right, so that, and thank you, Alyssa, for the presentation. We do have, if I survive, we do have an, so I know that we kind of, we first had the general summary discussion, then we had each individual that was in there. We do have an open microphone later, so if you've had thoughts on earlier proposals, that would be the good time to bring that up. But otherwise, I will turn it back to John.